Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Tricia Nelson is an internationally acclaimed author, transformational speaker, and emotional eating expert. Tricia attended Amherst College and began her career working at the Seattle Art Museum. While in Seattle, she began working with a spiritual healer who helped her create a lifestyle of positive self-care, self-love, and improved self-esteem. She lost 50 pounds by identifying and healing the underlying causes of her emotional eating. She has spent over 30 years researching the hidden causes of the addicted personality. Tricia is the author of the #1 best-selling book, Heal Your Hunger: 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. She also certifies health coaches so they can get better results, referrals, and revenue by helping their clients overcome emotional eating. Tricia is the host of the popular podcast, The Heal Your Hunger Show, and has been featured on NBC, CBS, KTLA, Fox, and Discovery Health. Tricia Nelson, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I have unfortunate news for you. You are starting this podcast with a little bit of a deficit in clout. I have heard you say on podcasts that you are in your 50s, and that is totally a lie. You are not in your 50s. We just had video on, and I saw you, and I've seen you before, and that is absolutely a lie. You're 30 maybe.
Thank you. Way to boost your guest's ego right out of the gate.
We just can't establish any kind of trust until you be straight up honest with us.
Okay.
Well, you look amazing, and we so appreciate you coming on our show today to talk about what I think is, I think we know like the tip of this iceberg that is emotional eating. And I think especially since the pandemic, it has become more and more apparent just how big of a story this is. But before we kind of get into that, let's hear your story. Can you tell us a little bit about the things that you suffered through and discovered about yourself along the way?
Sure. Yeah. I was an emotional eater from the get-go. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I remember just loving food. I love to eat. I love to cook. I love to serve food to other people, go out to dinner. It was just a big highlight for me. And, that wouldn't have been a problem, except for the fact that I gained weight easily. So by age 20, I was 50 pounds overweight and super frustrated because I'd already been on several diets and exercise programs, and I could lose weight, but I always put it back on. So I was a yo-yoer. So I'd lose 30, gain 20, lose 10. And I had 5 different sizes of pants in my closet because I never knew what size I'd be. So that's how it went for years. And I was incredibly frustrated and felt really hopeless, to be honest. And I was a binge eater also. So I was really, my self-esteem took a big hit. So what happened, long story short, is I did meet somebody who helped me go deeper and deal with the underlying causes of why I was driven to eat. And that made all the difference, between that and creating self-care habits that helped me just be more emotionally balanced. I was able to lose the weight and keep it off. And it's been several decades now. So I'm really grateful. And basically Heal Your Hunger and my podcast, of 5 years, all that came about really based on my own journey, but also I've been working with other emotional eaters for decades as well. And so that informed my research, and I developed a process, really a step-by-step process to help people heal from emotional eating. And it's just, I wake up happy and excited to do what I do and watch people's lives transform.
That's really interesting and quite the story. It's amazing that you came out the other side and were eager to share your story. When I started taking nutrition clients, I realized really quickly why there was a box of Kleenexes in the office because it was used all the time. Why is eating so emotional for most of us?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Eating is emotional and not eating is emotional, so we definitely are drawn to emotional eating. I think we're all emotional eaters to some degree. And people who are doing it a whole lot more, they're doing it to stuff their emotions. I was uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And so when I had feelings I didn't like, I just grabbed food, and it wasn't a conscious thing like, oh, I'm going to stuff my emotions now. It was just a subconscious, unconscious habit, to always be looking for something carby and snacky and, nuts and chips. And, I loved ooey gooey chewy foods. So cookies and candies and ice cream. So these foods numbed me out. Okay. They numbed my emotions. And that's really what emotional eating is numbing yourself with food, so you don't feel. And it works temporarily, until your stomach gets empty. And then you're like, uh-oh, got to start over again. So that's really what happens for people when they emotionally eat. And it's a very typical thing to do. And I will say also, when you stop eating, which is maybe why you saw a lot of tears also, when you go on a healthy eating plan, at first it's like, woohoo, we're doing it, looking good, feeling good. But after a couple of weeks, it gets hard, and it's like, what is that about? And what happens is the feelings that we have buried for so long come bubbling to the surface. This is why I was a yo-yo dieter, because I'd feel good losing weight for a time, but then the emotions that had been packed down with food started coming to the surface, and I didn't have tools for dealing with them. And on account of that, I was like, wait, give me my comfort back, and I'd go back to the sugar and the carbs.
Wow. So is that the difference? I was going to ask you that. Is that the difference between being an emotional eater and just having like emotions when you eat? Like if I had, a hard day at work and, I'm a little stressed out, but I just have maybe like a normal meal, that's very different than what you're describing, which is you're eating to, bury those emotions so you don't feel them. Is that right?
Yeah. I consider it to be a spectrum. Like, I think we're all emotional eaters. We can all go overboard. But the spectrum is informed by two things. One is the level of control that you have, and the other is the consequences. So let's say someone goes on a cruise and they lose, they eat and drink through the cruise. It's all free food. Why not? And they gain 5 pounds. Well, that's not a huge consequence, and when you feel kind of like, oh my gosh, my jeans are tight, someone will cut back on their, they won't eat sweets for 2 weeks and they'll jog extra, like 5 miles extra each week. And boom, the 5 pounds are off. Okay. That's someone with quite a bit of control and not too much, too many consequences. They're on the low end of the emotional eating spectrum. So, but if somebody, eats a lot, like they're a binge eater and they go on these binges that sort of grab a hold of them. And for 2 weeks, they're in this terrible cycle of eating sugar and carbs and feeling bad and overeating and not wanting to work out on account of it, and they're not only gaining weight, but they're getting depressed. They don't want to have sex. It's like, it affects a lot of your mood and the way you interact in the world. That's a lot more consequences than the person who went on the cruise. And that's somebody who doesn't have a whole lot of control either, because once they start to eat, they keep going. They can't pull back. They can't course correct. And so that's somebody on the higher end of the spectrum. And that's more in the food addiction arena. That's where I was, I would go on big binges, sit in front of the TV and just overeat until I felt stuffed, and then I didn't want to go out with my girlfriends the next day because I was bloated, or I didn't want to have my video on Zoom, and so this is before Zoom, but of course, but the point is that happens to people who are more in the food addiction arena. They've lost control and they're having mounting consequences.
Yeah, you mentioned addiction. I think this is really important, specifically food addiction. You've also mentioned sugar and carbs. And I'm curious to know why I don't see many people, freebasing kale smoothies on the corner. It's really hard to get addicted to a ribeye steak or, whatever broccoli. But I think most of us know it's pretty easy to get hooked on sugar specifically. What is it doing in our brains that makes it so hard to leave behind?
Yeah. So sugar is highly addictive. I am a total sugar addict. I still know that I have the propensity to go overboard on sugar, and I had to cut it out of my diet in order to have any success in losing weight and keeping it off, because sugar was the thing I sabotaged with. I'm like, oh, I can just have one, I can just eat one. And of course I couldn't. So one cookie never satisfied me. I'd end up eating the whole bag, or handfuls of chips or the whole bag of chips or the whole pint of ice cream. So, what people don't realize is sugar is physically addictive, and there's sugar hidden in so many of our foods, even in foods where it shouldn't be, like tomato sauce and salad dressing and cereal and all kinds of places. And healthy foods. Like you go to Whole Foods, you better be careful. You can't just assume those foods are super healthy because they put sugar in soups, dressings, everything. And again, to get you hooked. It's not just the big bad, Coca-Cola company. It's like it's natural food companies as well. It's just you don't have to have sugar in all these things, but as a nation, we're really hooked. And so, if you're eating foods that have hidden sugars, you're unconsciously sabotaging yourself because it'll create cravings and make it super hard to say no to foods that are definitely not on your food plan if you're trying to lose weight and keep it off. So it's really important. And I do, like we were talking about earlier, I have something called the Quit Sugar Challenge that I do quarterly. And this is just to help people get it out of their foods. I teach where the foods are, like all the over 80 names for sugar, where the sugar is hiding in your foods, how to avoid those foods, how to have sweet, yummy foods in spite of being sugar-free, because there's really great alternatives now, like stevia and monk fruit. Thank goodness. I always say stevia is God's gift to emotional eaters. I don't use a lot of it, but it definitely comes in handy. So I can have a natural soda with seltzer water and some stevia, some flavored stevia. So I bring people through a 5-day process of quitting sugar just to make it so much easier. And it's really fun when you do it in community with other people, because then, basically you get cheered on, you realize you're not the only one who's been addicted, and it just makes it so much easier. So that's my Quit Sugar Challenge. And I'll just mention, if somebody wants to get on the wait list for that, it's quitsugarchallenge.com, and we'll notify you when our next one's coming up.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that program sounds super helpful, and you were able to make it very affordable, I would say. Like, it's not expensive at all, and can be really helpful. And you mentioned something that I totally agree with. The number of ways that a food company can say sugar's in this spreads it out all across the ingredients. I can't remember what the number's up to now, but it's at least like 60 or 80 different names that all are basically sugar that the food companies can, again, spread out through the ingredients list so you don't necessarily see it, or you don't see it at the top of the list. It's ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous. It's sad, actually.
Well, and the food companies are more than willing to, create food that is maximally sweet and fatty and salty that you just can't have one. It's like the Dorito effect, good luck having one handful of that. You're going to continue eating that far, far longer than you want to.
Yes, no question about it. And also regarding the difference between an emotional eater and a food addict, I had mentioned it's a spectrum. And I just wanted to circle back and say, if somebody wants to find out where they are on that spectrum, I have a free quiz on my website, which is healyourhunger.com. And you can literally take a 2-minute quiz and find out where you are in that spectrum, and then know what steps to take.
So I think we all know, we've been talking a lot about overeating as related to emotional eating, but I think, we can also use undereating, anorexia, bulimia, or some degree of undereating as also a way to not feel more difficult feelings. Is that true?
100%. Yeah, you nailed it. My experience is emotional eating is to me, a very useful term, because it covers all different kinds of disordered eating. Because, if you think about it, if somebody has extreme control around food, like they're super restrictive, super careful about what they eat, or they, nibble on a Larabar throughout the day, one Larabar, my experience is if we weren't out of control, we wouldn't need to control ourselves. And so oftentimes people who are in extreme restriction and control, they're emotional eaters too, and they're emotionally undereating, emotionally restricting, and it can, starving yourself can absolutely put you in a different frame of mind where you don't feel a lot of feelings except hunger, and that can be an escape as well. So yeah, you really nailed it. It's, to me, emotional eating covers the whole spectrum of overeating, undereating, binging, purging, orthorexia, being obsessed with food and nutrients, and calories and all that. Exercising, bulimorexia, exercising to get rid of calories eaten. I mean, there's so many different ways to be messed up around food, disordered around food. I've done many of them. But at the end of the day, to me, it does To be simplistic about it, it does fall under the category of emotional eating because we're using these ways of eating to numb ourselves.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned orthorexia. This is a term that I only heard for the first time maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It's relatively new, but I think a lot of people can relate to it. Can you go a little bit deeper into what orthorexia is?
Yeah, I mean, it's, if you go into a community of vegans or and I don't mean to single out vegans, but vegetarianism, veganism, it's somebody who's just really into nutrition or any kind of fad diet, keto, paleo, whatever, intermittent fasting, you're going to find people, not everybody, but you're going to find people who are obsessed, and they are like really careful and strict around what they're eating, strict and following a particular diet. And they're emotional eaters. They're just trying to grab a hold of something that's giving them a sense of control because, like I said, they're probably in their heart of hearts feeling out of control, And so to me, I mean, what I do for my clients is I help them get off the diet track and get out of the obsession period, because to give up one obsession and to adopt another is not freedom. You're still not free. And the obsession, I mean, foodies, can sometimes fall into this as well. People are watching all the foodie shows or whatever. It's just any kind of obsession, my experience, is really a way to numb out, and escape our uncomfortable feelings. And, ultimately it doesn't work because we still have the feelings. They're just buried. They're still going to come and haunt us, and we haven't really healed anything.
That is a little tricky. We tend more towards low carbohydrate diets, and we work more with, ketogenic type diets, carnivore type diets. What we try to say is like, look, we're like somebody who works at the Ford store. Like, if you want a Chevy, you should probably go to the Chevy store and talk to them as a Ford guy or whatever. Like, I wouldn't make a lot of friends by yelling at everybody about how terrible Chevy is. You just would come to me because I can help you with that. But it is interesting that like those kinds of things can flip, and it is a little bit tricky. I had an experience where I was doing one meal a day and doing, kind of 24-hour fasting pretty much every day. And that ended up crashing my metabolism. Something that was initially really good started making my hands and feet really cold and started, making me have weird sodium issues and water retention issues. And so it is interesting that you can take something that initially seems really good and gets you really good results, but push it too far until it's not really helping you anymore.
Well, there's no question, and it's not a bad thing to be conscious. I mean, you have to be conscious of what you're eating and the quality of the foods you're eating and find a plan that works for you. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's important, knowing what your triggers are and finding a plan that doesn't include them. But yeah, it's when we flip into obsession, and it's true. We can do it with anything, frankly.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Well, we had a dietitian work for us maybe like 10 years ago. And I remember her philosophy as she kind of got up in front of all the personal trainers. And she had this quote that was all about intuitive eating. And it was like, your body knows exactly what it needs, and you need to listen to your body. And sometimes you eat a little too much, and sometimes you eat not enough. And it was really kind of vague. And I really appreciated the quote, and I didn't disagree with it, but I've also seen people intuitively eat themselves to like 400 pounds. So how do we like eat intuitively without, making ourselves unhealthy?
Well, I love that you said that, because I've fallen in that trap myself. I would intuit that I should eat way more than I should have, and that's when somebody's an emotional eater on the higher end of that spectrum that, from the quiz, my experience is our signals are off, like we've been in such a habit of numbing with food, and reaching for food. It's just so habitual that we can't trust our signals, and so, yeah, we're like, no, I'm really hungry. And I'm telling you, I have that conversation with my head, in my head sometimes where, and I've been doing this for 30 years, but I'll be like, oh, I'm so hungry. And then I'll have to stop and be like, really, Trish, like, are you? And here's one of the things that helps me is I recommend something called it's called 3 meal magic, which is eating 3 meals with nothing in between. And you can still do a little intermittent fasting by putting 12, 13 hours between your breakfast and between your dinner and your breakfast. But the nice thing about eating 3 meals that are sort of 4 or 5 hours in between each meal is that you start to be able to trust your body. I mean, it is a structure, but it's one that helps you start to regulate your eating in a way that you haven't for many years. Emotional eaters tend to be snackers, bingers, erratic eaters, and so we don't know how to eat. Whereas if you just do the 3 meal structure, healthy meals, healthy fats, healthy vegetables, proteins, then you can start to be able to know when you're physically hungry versus emotionally hungry. So if I'm trying to convince myself I should go to the refrigerator, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, what's going on? And so I'm like, because I had a healthy breakfast. So chances are I'm not starving. And so I can say what's really going on and have this conversation and start to really, do a little sleuthing work. Oh, you're nervous about this upcoming presentation. Oh, it's making you feel hungry. Or, oh, you have a phone call you don't want to make, so there's a conversation we need to start having with ourselves in order to know the difference between the emotional hunger and the physical hunger. But I find that when I'm on a regular plan of eating, it helps me build that trust and helps me be able to discern because I'm not all over the place with, my food consumption.
Wow. That sounds like a really good strategy, especially, given after the pandemic. One of my favorite Facebook quotes or posts that somebody made like a month into the pandemic was this girl made a sign to herself that said, "Hey, you are not hungry. Go away." And she stuck it on her fridge to remind her not to raid the fridge all the time. That's really interesting to go 5-6 hours between meals. I'm wondering if doing that helps teach people what foods they should be eating to keep them more satisfied in that gap. Because I've always contested that, the soda shop down the road is always busiest at like 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Google. You can look this up. And it's like, why are people hungry for sugar 2 or 3 hours supposedly after a common mealtime? And I just wonder if making somebody go 5 or 6 hours, does that make them self-select different foods so they stay a little bit more full in between meals?
Well, I think that's really important, to make sure you're getting the right, mix of foods that can help you feel satisfied. But I mean, there's no guarantee you're not going to have some hunger pangs, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. My experience as emotional eaters, we tend to be afraid of hunger and be like, oh my God, I'm dying, and so let me do something about the hunger. When we feel a little bit hungry, when our stomachs aren't full, what we're feeling are emotions, or we have the opportunity to feel emotions, and you can't heal what you don't feel. And so getting acquainted with our emotions in between our meals, and that's really mostly why I recommend 3 meal magic, is because you have to have some space to begin to know what your emotions are. Otherwise you're in reaction mode all the time. And so I find that to be really helpful and I teach people ways to get in touch with themselves, like meditation, expressive writing, things that can help you get more emotionally connected. My experience is we're all so damn busy, running from one thing to the next, over scheduling. And there's a high that comes from that busyness, that adrenaline rush. And overeaters tend to be overdoers. So we especially like it. Not only that, we like the validation we get from pleasing people and overworking and being superstars, and so that it gives us a sense of ourselves when we do that, which is something we often lack. So there's a lot more to unravel in this, to unpack and recognize that busyness, is keeping that busyness, that snacking, that eating all day, grazing, that's keeping us from feeling. So a little bit of hunger is not a bad thing. It's something to adjust to and to helps us to begin to understand what's really going on inside versus just unconsciously, keeping ourselves filled up all the time.
Wow. Well, I am definitely stealing that line. You can't heal what you can't feel. That is very well explained. I think what I notice the most with myself and my clients is that, the initial feelings of like hunger, you're so hungry that it's really just kind of dominating your life. It kind of subsides over time. And I do think it has to do with feeling it and being, okay with being hungry sometimes, just like it's okay to be cold. And I'll steal the experience from one of our former guests, Aranda in the UK, and the way he said it is hunger in the past was like a bully. Like it would stop him, whatever he was doing, and make him pay attention to the hunger. And as he kind of reframed his, life around food and changed his diet a little bit and changed his lifestyle, the hunger became more of a friend that would come by every now and again, would tap him on the shoulder and just be like, hey, like, is it time to eat? No, looks like you're busy. Well, just come back in a few hours. And I thought that was a pretty fair way to explain how hunger can transform when we do give it the space to feel it and just know it's like being cold. It's like being angry. It's just an emotion. There's something you're feeling temporarily.
Yeah, no, it helps to kind of acclimate to that. I'm still an emotional eater at the end of the day. I'm free from emotional eating, but I still got it in me to do that. And so that's why I recommend, 4 or 5 hours between meals. Cause if I go like 7 hours, like I remember I was at a restaurant, a couple weeks ago with my boyfriend, and it was New Year's Eve actually. And it was taking forever. Like because it was New Year's Eve, we had a hard time finding a restaurant that could seat us, within the hour. And so we were waiting longer. And then when we were seated, it took a long time to get our food. And I finally said to him, I said, will you give me your leg? Cause I'm hungry and I need to start eating now. So I still need to eat on a regular schedule. Otherwise I do get a little crazy. But the 4 or 5 hour window, that to me, that's good. And that doesn't set off those crazy feelings.
We have not addressed cannibalism yet in this podcast. And I just want to say we are cannibal positive. If that's the lifestyle you choose, we accept you. That's totally fine if you want to go the way of the Donner Party.
Yeah, never admitted that on our radio show before.
That's amazing. Recently on a podcast episode that you did, you had 2 gentlemen on your show and they were talking about some of the issues that they had around food. And I'm wondering if you believe this is an issue more for women, or is this pretty equal among the genders, men and women?
Oh my goodness. Well, being a woman, I can speak for women, but I will say, just statistically speaking, most of the people who come to me are women. But I have a lot of men who read my book and get amazing help from my book. There's no shortage of, an obesity epidemic among men as well as women. So it's definitely a problem. Maybe men don't identify the emotional part of their eating as much, not, just stereotypically not being in touch with their emotions, maybe as much as women, or not being as emotional as women, and perhaps not recognizing their need for connection and community either. But yeah, there's jillions of emotional eaters among the male population. There's no question about it.
Interesting. So once we identify that this is an issue for us, we're starting to feel those feelings. What are our first steps? Like what things can we start to do to kind of correct this and get on the other side of it?
Yeah, well, I would definitely recommend us having a morning routine. So much of our eating is stress related. And as I said, we tend to be overdoers. So, we got to look at our stress. Like you can't just change your eating and not change your lifestyle. It's just impossible to have success. So much of our eating is stress eating. So you got to address your stress. Start the day with some kind of morning routine, yoga, meditation, prayer, spiritual readings, a few things that can help you feel grounded and calm and can build, I call it putting money in your spiritual bank account. Okay. So putting money in your spiritual bank account that you can make withdrawals from later in the day, because late in the day is usually when people have the most trouble, late in the day into the evening, but that makes sense because we've added a whole lot of stress to our day. We've had a lot of people asking things of us. We're out of energy. It's things have piled up, and late in the day is when we have a dip in our energy. And so that's when we reach for coffee, we reach for snacky foods, chocolate, and so if you've built some stores that you take withdrawals from early in the day, the first thing in the morning. And it also is just a way to get connected with yourself, writing your feelings out, writing about your day, journaling or doing expressive writing when you're kind of jammed up or pissed off. That can help offload a lot of feelings. Start your day with some kind of ritual that can help you be grounded and, and really nourished. It's not food that we're really hungry for when we're overeating. It's some kind of energy, some kind of sense of oneness and wellness. And we can do that first thing. We can pay into that first thing in the morning. Vital. I have a meditation practice. I've had it for over 30 years. I'd rather get up and go and get it. I'd rather go drink coffee and eat my breakfast. But first thing in the morning, I've built this discipline of meditating first and doing spiritual readings. And boy, it just puts a positive spin on my day, and it gives me stores I can draw on throughout the day. So I'd say definitely that. Also take a look at your schedule. Like, you're too busy. Like, everybody's too busy, and emotional eaters are busier than most, like maniacally busy. I'm going to have a full-time job, be a parent and get a degree at the same time. It's like, you're going to pay for that. Recognize your limitations. You can do anything you want if you don't mind overeating, if you don't mind paying the price. But the more stress we have in our lives, the more temptation there is for stress eating, for quick energy, for sustenance, for kind of getting through, driving. And it's not a peaceful way to live. And then, of course, we have the self-recrimination that comes from our late night binges, and feeling awful and low energy. And then we don't want to exercise. So, hey, we got to make changes, and I tell my clients, buck up, buttercup. Like, you can't just change your eating. You can't do it in a vacuum. That's why diets are silly, because they don't give you tools for living. We need to develop new tools for living. If you take food away and you're on a clean eating plan, you better have another way to deal with your stress, another way to de-stress, another way to deal with your emotions. And, and that's just the way it's got to be. You can't do it in a vacuum.
I love all of that. I love the morning routine. I think that's tremendous. And you're right. Like, change is really difficult. And one of my favorite phrases is, when pain increases, hearing improves. Like, change is really hard.
Yeah.
Why would you be motivated to change if it didn't suck bad enough? And you know what? That's totally fine. But for most people, it comes to this point where your life really sucks. Well, you're going to have to address some things. The pucker up, buttercup. I'm going to steal that one too. That's great. That's great. And just for the listener, Tricia mentioned journaling, and I had resisted journaling for a very, very long time. I just had recently started putting some words down on paper, and I cannot believe how amazing journaling is for helping you realize emotions that you may not have even recognized. I've said this before, like, I'll be writing something and it's almost like the pen is coming up with words that I didn't think out before. It's really strange, but it's been a wonderful tool. Is that something you do every single day?
I would say at this point, I don't. For years, I did do it every single day. I do it when I'm jammed up, especially when I'm pissed off about something, because that's a danger zone for me when I'm angry. If I feel hurt by something or something's really heavy for me, I'm upset about something, I go right to pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard. I pull up a Word document and I just bang it out. And boy, oh boy, offloading that toxic, load of emotions is so healthy, because it's, you either deal with it or it deals with you, and so I find that incredibly helpful. So I'd say maybe every other day or so I'm writing. I'm not getting angry every other day, but there's always something that just helps me to offload those emotions, sadness, just feeling down, anything.
Yeah, I love that. There's a story of Abraham Lincoln when, I believe it was General Meade, didn't take advantage of the Confederates losing at Gettysburg. And he could have annihilated General Lee. And he wrote this steaming letter to General Meade and ended up never sending it. So he didn't offend him, but he still got his words out on paper, which I thought was a great example of, just put those words out there. If they're difficult emotions, that's fine. It's much better on a piece of paper than it is said in a, minute of frustration that ruins a relationship forever,
No question about it.
Wow.
No question.
Do you
It's a great
practice,
story.
you've already mentioned meditation. Do you practice breathing and breath work as well with your clients?
Yeah, I have had people on my podcast and people in some of my retreats that do breath work. I don't teach it personally. But yeah, it's a great tool for people who have more anxiety, and want to have a way to really self-soothe that isn't reaching for food. I find breathwork to be super helpful.
That's great. When it is time for us to eat, do you place any value on the different macronutrients or certain foods? Is there some type of hierarchy that you try to get people on if it's not one particular diet? What are some things that people should be thinking about when they're thinking, okay, what am I going to make out of my diet? Should I have 100 grams of carbs or 300 grams of carbs, or I should always eat potatoes or rice, or what kinds of principles should people be thinking about when they are eating food?
My experience is the heavier the food, the more likely I am to be numbing, and so I find that emotional eaters consider vegetables, if they're not very, they haven't done a lot of work around nutrition or read a lot of books, they think of a vegetable as peas or corn or potatoes, and so I have to tell people, hey, the more green your food, the more leafy and green your food, the closer to the earth your food is. Not only are the easier that you're going to have losing weight, but you're going to feel more feelings, and you'll be able to, again, what you feel, you can heal. So, but my experience is carbs are tricky for us, and they do metabolize as sugar in our bodies. And so we have to be careful about grains, grains, flours, and those kinds of things, starchy foods, potatoes, white potatoes, especially those things, we're drawn to because they naturally anesthetize our feelings, and so I try to just recommend to people eat greener food, fewer carbs. So the paleo plan has worked for me for years. And so unless somebody's like a, high intensity athlete where they need more carbs, but, if someone who wants to lose weight, to me, cut out the carbs, cut out the carbs and the sugar, and, make everything as clean and close to the ground or from, where its original source is. And you're going to have a much easier time losing weight, but you better have a plan for addressing those emotions that are going to come up.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a question of kind of supply. Like as we evolved, like we might find sugar out on the landscape, like sometimes or maybe seasonally, and sugar rewards us. There's no like upper limit. It always tastes good, and more is always better than less. And so it's really just a question of supply, that it's just everywhere all the time that we can find it, versus having it just a one portion of the year. So I think that's a really great thing to be thinking about. And what other ways can people deal with their emotions around eating? You give a few good suggestions in your book, if you don't mind talking about some of those.
Yeah, I call them 6 self-care success secrets. And these things are, again, things you can do in the morning to create the kind of a ritual of self-care. But writing, as we talked about, reading spiritual literature, meditation, talking, like picking up the phone and talking to a friend. Walking is really not like power walking, just walking and being close to nature. I like to walk and pray. Those are all things, and prayer, these are things that can help calm us down, help us feel a better sense of well-being where we're not so anxious or worried. They can calm our racing mind. Emotional eaters tend to not only be overeaters, but overthinkers. And so we have to do something to quiet our minds. Like our minds will scare us. They'll scare us, awful lies about everything. And so we have to be addressing that in order to have success around food. So those are really, really important as well. Sleep, of course, drinking water, those help too. That's
great. In your book, you also have the acronym PEP, PEP. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So, for anybody who's like, I just like food. I don't know what this gal's talking about. I just like food. So first of all, take the emotional eating quiz on my website, find out where you are on the spectrum. But to help you start to realize that your emotions might be a little more closely linked to your cravings than you think, I recommend that you take the PEP test. So PEP is an acronym, PEP. The first P stands for painkiller. And what I mean by this, we've talked a lot about it, is we use food to kill pain. Emotional pain, a job that doesn't fit us, a relationship that's on a rocky footing, a kid that's dysregulated, a parent that's sick, pandemic. I mean, there's lots of ways to be in emotional pain these days. And so we tend to reach for food when we're feeling strong feelings of pain, and upset and, just discouragement, whatever. So watch for that. So when you have a craving, like, oh, I think I need to go get something to eat, dig into it a little bit. Am I feeling some pain in some way? The E stands for escape. We use food as a form of escape. Like we kind of want to check out. And when we're super responsible and we, are doing good job in our life and our family and all that, and we're tired and we're overwhelmed, and maybe we have that racing mind that's giving us scary ideas about how bad things are, we want to check out. And I used to get my favorite binge foods, sit in front of my favorite bingeable TV shows and go to town, so that's a typical thing as well, as wanting to escape our heads. And the last P is punishment, which seems counterintuitive because yummy foods tend to be a reward, but I was hardly rewarding myself when I go overboard and end up feeling sick. So it's really, really important to realize that, we tend to beat ourselves up and be really hard on ourselves. And this can drive our eating as well, and so this is something to look for. So again, to sum it up, PEP stands for painkiller, escape, and punishment. And these are some unconscious ways that we might be feeling cravings.
I love that. That's so easy to remember. Such an easy thing to go back to. We were talking offline a little bit about your podcast. Everybody in 2020 started a podcast, including us. And we have a second podcast that's all about podcasting itself. And so I just have to ask, podcasting, you are an OG. You have been doing this, you told me, for 5 years. You've got over 300 episodes. It's very highly rated, lots of high ratings on Apple. What things have you learned from podcasting over the years?
Oh, wow. I've learned, don't make hard work of it. I'm not a perfectionist. So my podcast isn't perfect. I barely take any ums or goofs out of it. I just let her rip. I do a lot of riffing on my podcast. So I just I speak from the heart. When there's something that strikes me in my life, I'm an emotional eater. And so I've got lessons from my own life that I share in my podcast. I do interview health experts as well, mental health experts as well. And I like those shows too. But I just, it's from the heart. To me, it makes the biggest difference. And I think that's what people want. They want real, they don't want polished, they want real. And so I just come from the heart. I share from my personal experience, and I'm sure I could do a lot better. I'm sure it could be better. I'm sure my sound could be better. My ratings could be better, everything, but I don't get twisted up about it. I do it as a labor of love. I do enjoy it. It does enable people to kind of spy on me, so, if they want to kind of check me out and check my workout, but they're not ready to say, yes, I need your help. They can listen for a little while. And I think that's really awesome. And some of them, they just listen and get support and they never contact me. But I do love doing it. I'm so glad I started my podcast, and it's just a way of expressing myself and my passion, and for those who energetically align with that message, they come aboard. It's a cool thing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I just have to say, like, for me, listening to your podcast, it does come through as very authentic and very real. And I really appreciate that. I think oftentimes shows are way overproduced and overdone. And I don't appreciate that as much. I want to get to know the person and what their message is. And I think you do such a great job. And you do a great job dancing between those two formats, doing solo shows where you're just talking, which I can tell you is really, really hard to do. It was hard for me to do, but also doing the interview style and bringing on other experts and sharing other people's stories. You do a great job listening and letting them tell their stories. So I just have to say your podcast is great. And I recommend to the listener, go over and make sure that you listen and subscribe and do what I did and give it a 5-star review and rating and review. Like it's really helpful. And we really appreciate your show. This
Well,
has been,
thank you.
absolutely. You're very welcome. Very deserving. This has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed talking about this. Like I said in the beginning, I think this is so much more important than people realize. I think people are so often on islands and they think that they are the ones that are broken and something is wrong with them. And everybody almost ubiquitously has some degree of that and feeling like they're broken. And we can all do a better job of, getting together and sharing our message. What is one simple tip that you would like to leave for the listener that they can take and apply in their lives from this conversation?
I would say write down on a little sticky note and put it on your mirror or your refrigerator and have it say, it's not about the food.
Well, Tricia, this has been an amazing conversation. Like I said, where can people go one more time to find you and connect with you and your work?
Healyourhunger.com, HEAL, healyourhunger.com.
Awesome. We will link to that in the show notes. Tricia Nelson, author of Heal Your Hunger, 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. Thank you so very much for your personal journey and for your willingness to go out and share it with the world. Like I said, it's such an important message, and we so appreciate you and your work and for the time that you took to be on our show today. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Casey. It's been really fun.
It's been a lot of fun. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.